Hello, my name is Lupita Ramirez, and the topic that I chose to talk about for this project is the gentrification going on in Mexico. First, I'll be setting up the context, a bit of the context of Mexico, what it was like before the main catalyst of the gentrification, which was COVID. I'll be talking about before, during, and after. So to start, as we all know, Mexico is a very popular vacational spot. People go there during the summer with their families or during spring break with their friends as students. But either way, it's nothing new. A lot of people move to Mexico because it is generally cheaper than the cost of living is generally cheaper than in the U.S. And when foreigners have moved there, they haven't rocked the boat too much with the locals. There's been a balance, not so much conflict that it causes a lot of coverage in the media and doesn't make people talk about it. So most of the people that moved to Mexico were known as digital nomads. And digital nomads were often freelance workers, or are often freelance workers, armed with laptops, seek a lifestyle over hefty paychecks. And as I mentioned, Mexico has hosted digital nomads for years who bring in money and business for the locals. And according to Indeed, the average base salary is almost $27,000, which isn't bad in my opinion. It's a stable salary that lets you do what you need to and isn't so much to kick people out of their local neighborhoods. So during 2017 and 2019, pre-COVID, the average rent per month in Mexico City, which is one of the main cities that I'll be talking about for the presentation, was around $550. Now, as you can see by the table, by 2023, that number increased to almost $1,000, almost twice the amount. And it's important to note that this part of the table shows the rent per month for a one-bedroom apartment in the city. But it's also important to note that this table collects data from people who put in their personal expenses, their personal data, and what they spent in Mexico City, and not data from a research center or the government. And although it may not be from the government or from a research center, it does show that the average rent per month in Mexico City has increased dramatically, especially from 2022 to 2023, where it increased to almost $200. And as we know, COVID-19, more people started working remotely, and by 2025, which is crazy to think about that's already next year, that 36.2 million workers, or 22% of Americans, will be working remotely. And working remotely means that as long as you are in the same time zone as your company or who you're working for, then you can basically work anywhere. Technically, you don't really have to be in the same time zone, but wouldn't it be more convenient if you did work the same time zone, like let's say in Mexico? So Mexico has been the number one. Got ahead of myself. So with remote workers, which are different from digital nomads, are full-time workers from the US in high-paying jobs, most likely in the especially in the tech sector, choosing to set up their home offices in Mexico. Now, as you can see, the average tech salary in 2023 was over $100,000, which, if I had that kind of salary, I would move anywhere, really. But as I mentioned, working remotely allows people to work from home, work from another country where the cost of living is cheaper, yet the same time the time zone is the same. So Mexico City has been the number one work hub because it has been the number one work hub and is the fastest growing already established remote work hub. And compared to the other countries, which two are Spanish speaking, Spanish and Colombia, it still holds the number one spots. Now, for people moving to Mexico City, there has been some conflict, which I will get why to later. But I'll be using an anecdote from Carla Morin, who visited Mexico in 2017 and then met her boyfriend in 2018 and moved there permanently in 2019. And her thoughts on people moving to Mexico is as follows. The problem is lack of assimilation. Are we learning the language? Are we making local friends? Are we making the effort to be part of the local fabric? If you're going to come here, make an effort to be here. Warren's experience highlights the importance of assimilating into local culture when moving to Mexico. Warren's journey from newcomer to permanent resident emphasizes the need for effort in becoming part of the local fabric. And also like that she's aware of the assimilation that should be going on for non-Mexicans moving to Mexico City, because the culture, the language, the food, the community, the everything that keeps Mexico should be learned by other people, because it's what keeps that culture going. And if there's so many people moving in, then and people aren't willing to make an effort to be there, as she mentions, then that culture will eventually disappear, and it just won't be the same. And so, which brings me to what is gentrification. The people that may not be doing the assimilating, the learning, and the effort to be there. Gentrification is a demographic and economic shift displacing established communities in favor of wealthier newcomers and real estate development. And the pictures that I chose for this slide show a great but sad example of gentrification. So obviously this is before and after. The left side shows the before. And I'll be talking about the story of this building later in a few slides. But essentially, a company bought the building, moved out the people that were living there, and created what is now on the building on the right, with renovated apartments, higher priced rents, and just shops and commercial places that's more convenient for people with higher paying jobs. So with rising prices, Mexicans living in the area make good money and rent these apartments. Obviously, it's not like only high paying jobs. People with high paying jobs aren't the only ones living in these apartments. It's also local Mexicans with not as high paying jobs, but well paying jobs that let them live in these places. But once people with higher income move in, then rental prices are constantly increasing and forcing people to move out. So rental prices rose between 10 to 15% in 2023 on average for all of Mexico, but for popular neighborhoods like La Roma, which is one of the main neighborhoods that I'll mention later on, have experienced a more dramatic rental price increase of 20 to 30%. And not only does it impact the people living in those places, but also the people surrounding those places. Those who rely on locals for their businesses are having to move somewhere else because locals support their businesses, and once they're moved out, then there's nowhere they can go. This is the story of Noemi Ortiz, which is the family who had to one of the families that had to be forced out due to a company buying their building, and their story actually connects to the pictures that are first showed in the gentrification slide. And basically, Lisa's family owned a torta shop, and they had owned that shop for 50 years, but due to an increase in rent, they were forced to move. And similar to what's going on in Mexico City, protests in Oaxaca are trying to bring awareness to what's going on. The picture says no a la gentrificación en Oaxaca, which translates no to the gentrification in Oaxaca. And what led to this protests was the high influx of remote workers moving into Oaxaca, forcing a lot of local businesses and locals to move out. And one of these protests led to 6 arrests. And an article talking about this protest stated that the governor of state perceived these protests and those who were arrested as promoting hatred against foreigners. And this same article also mentioned him saying that this was an act of racism towards foreigners and those who were moving into Oaxaca. And personally, I don't think it wasn't any of this. Maybe some people are being racist in a way for people moving into Oaxaca, but I think it was more about bringing awareness to the situation about making restrictions on putting restrictions on who can move in, but also just overall bringing more awareness. And so this is another anecdote, another picture of the protest, and what Luis Ruiz is saying is, ya parecemos desconocidos en nuestro propio pueblo, which means that he feels like he's not recognized in his own pueblo, which is saying a lot, because that means that he doesn't feel at home. He feels like he feels like his home is being taken away. And it's obviously not cheap for people who are living in Mexico, because those who are moving in are earning US dollars, while the cost of rent is $1,500. The minimum pay is $8 per day. So it is very frustrating to see US dollar employees come into your community and forcing you to move out of your home while you can't do much about it. And so, a very important question that I would like to leave with you today is if this gentrification situation is similar to the migration process that we've seen here in America for hundreds of years. I wanted to ask if Americans migrating to Mexico is the same as Mexicans migrating to the US. Are they moving? I found that they aren't moving for the same reasons. I personally think that Mexicans, or in general Latin American immigrants going into the US, aren't moving because they want to. It's because they have to. It's not because they have the money to afford to live in the US. Well, it's the opposite going on here. And I feel like it's very ironic also, because it's the same thing that Americans have done since the beginning of America. They go into a place, which, as I mentioned, isn't new, but it's very But yeah, that's just the question that I wanted to leave you guys with. So thank you for listening, and these are my references.